A cat named Milo cried for days. His soft, pitiful mews filled the quiet animal shelter night after night, echoing in the dim corridors and stirring emotions in everyone who passed by his cramped enclosure. Milo's large, soulful eyes seemed to search the darkness for something or someone lost long ago. Those tearful eyes carried a secret, a deep longing that no one at the shelter could quite understand. Milo had once known the warmth of a loving home. Many years ago, a gentle man named Alexander had rescued him from the harsh, unforgiving streets. Alexander's caring hands and soft-spoken words had soothed the frightened kitten, and over time their bond had grown unbreakable. But fate had dealt a cruel blow. Not long after their happiest days together, Alexander fell ill and passed away quietly in his sleep. Overwhelmed with grief and struggling to care for the memories of his beloved husband, Alexander's family made the heartbreaking decision to surrender Milo to the shelter. When they brought him in, they explained that Milo had been left by a distraught woman named Alice Morgan. According to the paperwork, Milo was said to have been a gift from her late husband Edward, a man who had cherished the little cat with all his heart. Yet from the very first night in the shelter, something about Milo's endless crying suggested a story far more complicated than what the files revealed. Every night, as he huddled in the corner of his cage, his mews carried a note of desperation, a call for the presence of someone who once meant everything to him. It was as if his heart was unwilling to let go of a past too dear to forget. And one detail, seemingly insignificant at first, would soon ignite a mystery that challenged everything the shelter staff had believed. One cool morning during Milo's routine exam, Dr. Morgan, an empathetic veterinarian known for her gentle manner, was carefully checking Milo when her eyes were drawn to the small, worn tag attached to his collar. As she stroked his soft fur, she noticed the tag's faded letters. A.H. Squinting to make out the initials, she gasped softly, "Oh my God!" Her quiet exclamation was not meant for the busy corridor outside, but it sent a ripple of concern through her heart. At that moment, Michael, one of the shelter's most attentive staff members, approached. "What's wrong, Dr. Morgan?" he asked, his voice hushed, as if he feared disturbing something fragile. Dr. Morgan held up the tag carefully. "This tag says A.H., and that doesn't match what we have on file." Michael's eyes widened as he looked from the tag to Milo, who sat motionless in his cage with his head slightly bowed, his eyes still filled with sorrow. That very day, as Milo lay dozing in his kennel, his eyes half closed yet still reflecting an inner yearning, Michael's attention was drawn to another familiar object, Milo's feeding bowl. It was a simple, chipped ceramic bowl, its surface worn smooth by years of use. When Michael examined the bowl closely, he noticed something remarkable. Faintly etched on the bottom were the same initials, A.H. The inscription was almost lost in the faded glaze, yet it was unmistakable. A chill ran down Michael's spine as he realized that not only did Milo's collar carry those letters, but even his feeding bowl bore the same mysterious initials. Unsure of what to make of these clues, Michael decided to review Milo's records in detail. That evening, in the quiet of the shelter's staff office, he sat at his desk under a single, soft desk lamp, poring over the intake forms, medical charts, and volunteer notes about Milo. Although Milo had been at the shelter for nearly 6 years, several scattered comments hinted that the little cat was much older than everyone had assumed. One brief note from a volunteer read, "Milo's eyes hold memories of a lost friend." That simple line resonated deeply with Michael, suggesting that Milo's incessant crying was not merely sadness, it was a longing for someone whose name was hidden behind the initials A.H., Unable to keep his curiosity to himself any longer, Michael approached Sophie the following morning. Sophie, known for her intuitive nature and gentle heart, listened intently as Michael explained his concerns. "Sophie," he began quietly, "have you ever seen a pet whose belongings don't match the story we were given? Milo's tag and even his feeding bowl say A.H., yet our records indicate he was brought in by a Mrs. Morgan, who said his owner was Edward." Sophie's face grew thoughtful as she replied, "I can't recall anything like that." Sometimes a pet's past is more complicated than we know. Perhaps Milo's history holds a secret that we have yet to uncover. Their conversation left Michael with a firm resolve. He needed more information. The next step was clear. He would visit the address on the intake form. According to the records, Alice Morgan had surrendered Milo to the shelter. Michael hoped that Alice might provide clarity on the mysterious initials and help him understand Milo's true past. A few hours later, Michael drove to a modest house on a quiet suburban street. The house, modest, yet touched by hints of history, had a neatly trimmed lawn and a faded porch light that spoke of countless memories of the past. Michael knocked on the door, and after a brief wait, it swung open to reveal a middle-aged woman with kind but tired eyes. "Hello, I'm Michael from the city animal shelter," he said politely, offering a warm smile. "I'm calling about a cat you brought in a few years ago, Milo." The woman's face softened as she recognized him. "Yes, I remember Milo," she replied, her voice gentle, yet tinged with sorrow. "I was very worried about him after we lost Edward." Michael's heart ached at her tone, and he gently broached the subject. "Alice, when you brought Milo in, you mentioned that he belonged to your husband, Edward, but today, during our exam, we found that his collar tag and even his feeding bowl bear the initials A.H. Do you know anything about that?" For a long moment, Alice's eyes widened in a mix of surprise and sadness as she searched her memory. "A.H., I always thought his name was Edward," she murmured softly. "My husband loved Milo so dearly, and he often called him by a special name. A nickname, I always assumed. I never questioned it because I was so overwhelmed by our loss." Her voice trailed off as if the thought itself was too painful. After a pause, she continued, "Now that you mention it, I do remember Edward once talking about a friend he admired, a kind man named Alexander Hayes. But I never knew any more details. I assumed it was just a small, insignificant memory." Michael thanked her for her honesty and left with more questions swirling in his mind. On the drive back to the shelter, he thought about the significance of the initials A.H. It appeared that Milo's past might not be as simple as the records had stated. Perhaps Milo had been rescued by a man named Alexander Hayes before coming into Edward's care. The mystery deepened, and Michael knew that he must dig deeper. Back at the shelter, Michael gathered all available records on Milo. Late that night, under the soft glow of his desk lamp, he reviewed old intake forms, medical charts, and even handwritten notes from volunteers. Amidst the faded pages, one worn photograph caught his eye, a black-and-white picture of a kindly older man cradling a tiny, scruffy cat with bright, soulful eyes. The photograph was dated nearly 10 years ago, and the cat in the picture unmistakably resembled Milo. Michael studied the image carefully. The cat wore a ribbon around its neck, and on that ribbon were the initials A.H. in neat, embroidered letters. His heart pounded as the realization struck him. Milo had been known by the name Alexander long before he ever came to the shelter. Determined to confirm his suspicions, Michael began searching for any records or local mentions of Alexander Hayes. After hours of combing through old newspapers and community records, he found a brief obituary for a man named Alexander Hayes, a compassionate soul celebrated for his lifelong work with stray animals. The obituary mentioned that Alexander had rescued many abandoned animals over the years and was well loved in the community. Michael jotted down the contact information listed and, a few days later, decided to make a call. After several rings, a gentle voice answered. "Hello, this is Rebecca Hayes," the voice said softly. Michael introduced himself and explained that he was investigating the past of a shelter cat named Milo. "We believe Milo was rescued by your father, Alexander Hayes," he explained. "The tag on his collar and even his feeding bowl bear the initials AH. We would like to know if you might have any memories or records about him." Rebecca's voice grew soft and tremulous with emotion. "I do remember my father speaking fondly of a little cat he rescued on a bitter winter night," she recalled. "He always said that cat had the most soulful eyes, and that it was a small miracle. I never knew what happened to him after my father passed away. Please tell me everything you've learned." Her words, filled with both sorrow and hope, confirmed for Michael that Milo's mysterious initials were indeed linked to Alexander Hayes, the man who had given Milo his very first chance at life. Over the next several days, Michael arranged a meeting between Rebecca Hayes and Alice Morgan at the shelter. The meeting was set in a quiet, softly lit room with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, inviting conversation and understanding. When the day arrived, Michael, along with Dr. Morgan and Sophie, welcomed the two women. The air was heavy with unspoken memories and a cautious hope that together they might piece together Milo's true story. Alice's eyes filled with tears as she greeted Rebecca. "I never imagined I'd meet someone else who cared for Milo as much as I did," she said, her voice trembling as she recalled the past. "I always believed that Milo belonged solely to my late husband, Edward." Rebecca's face, equally sorrowful, softened as she replied, "I always cherished the memory of my father, Alexander Hayes, and that little cat he rescued. It appears Milo has carried the love of two families with him all along." For hours, the women spoke quietly, sharing memories and going through old photographs and documents that the shelter had archived. One faded photograph in particular captured their attention, a clear, black and white image of a tiny, hopeful cat wearing a ribbon with the initials AH. The image was dated from just days after Alexander Hayes had rescued him. As both women gazed at the picture in silence, a gentle understanding began to blossom. There were no harsh words or dramatic outbursts, only soft, heartfelt revelations that Milo's life had been woven with threads from two different, yet equally loving chapters. "It seems Milo was first rescued by Alexander Hayes," Alice whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then, after Edward cared for him, he continued on as part of our family. I always thought it was one continuous story, but now I see there were two distinct parts." Rebecca nodded, wiping away a tear. "Maybe Milo needed both families to fully understand what love is," she said softly. Michael and the shelter staff observed quietly as the two families reached a gentle decision. They agreed that Milo would live with both families, a shared arrangement that would allow him to spend alternating weeks with each family and join for special gatherings. This simple, heartfelt compromise felt natural to everyone involved, a fitting tribute to a little cat whose past was marked by love and loss. In the weeks that followed, Milo's story began to spread through the local community. It wasn't splashed across sensational headlines or broadcast as a dramatic news story. Instead, it was shared in quiet conversations among animal lovers, posted on community bulletin boards, and gently discussed on local radio segments. The story of Milo, the cat whose collar and even his feeding bowl revealed the secret initials AH, resonated deeply with those who heard it. People found comfort in the idea that a small creature could embody the love of two families, uniting them in a way that transcended pain and separation. At the shelter, Dr. Morgan, Michael, and Sophie assembled a modest memorial board chronicling Milo's journey. The board featured the faded photograph of Milo as a kitten with AH embroidered on his ribbon, several snapshots of him with Edward's family, and the touching moment when Alice Morgan and Rebecca Hayes first met. Visitors would pause, their eyes softening as they read the captions and absorbed the gentle story of Milo's past, a quiet celebration of how love, even when divided by loss, could mend broken hearts. Milo himself began to change. The relentless crying that once haunted the shelter's nights slowly diminished. When a familiar face, whether from Alice's family or Rebecca's, appeared at his cage, his ears would perk up, and he would cautiously approach. His purrs, once few and sorrowful, grew stronger and more content, filling the space with a soothing melody of healing. The shelter staff marveled at his transformation. The little cat who had once seemed so lost now appeared to know that he was finally home. Michael continued to document every step of Milo's journey in his personal journal. Late into the night, as the shelter's lights dimmed and the quiet hum of a distant fan blended with Milo's gentle purring, Michael wrote about the mystery of the initials, the long hours spent piecing together the past, and the tender meeting that had united two families. Sometimes, he wrote in one entry, a small detail, a faded tag on a collar, or an inscription on a feeding bowl can unlock a hidden chapter of a life. Milo's endless cry was a call for love, a plea to be remembered by those who truly cared. Now, that call has been answered. Did you enjoy Milo's quiet journey from endless sorrow to a shared, healing love? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that even the smallest details can unlock the deepest mysteries and bring hearts together, please like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and may you always find love in every hidden corner of your life.